Welcome back to the Bike Lane. This is episode 1 in season 2 and we're coming to you from the Bike Gallery. Today we're going to take a look at the coldest you've ever been on the back of Milan San Remo. Tweet of the week, a photo finish between Mark Cavendish and Kunda Court. A little bit of tech talk. How do you dress against the cold conditions? A look forward to this weekend's racing with Ghent-Wevelgem on, and it's Ride to School Day on Friday. I'm Matt Keenan, this is Wade Wallace, MrCyclingTips.com, don't forget the .au, and he's Scott McGrory, Olympic Games gold medalist. Let's go with episode 1 for season 2. Issue of the week, we want to take a look at Matt White's situation. The Americans who were suspended from Garmin Sharp, Danielson, Zabriskie and Van der Velde, they're back racing over in Spain. But Matt White, he's left languishing and waiting for the result to come down from Asada. Wade, should Matt White get his job back?
Well, all the Americans on Garmin, they got their jobs back. All of this will be forgotten. They have a career, and after cycling, they're going to have a career. Matt White, now that we see how everything's played out, you know, he's left without a job. His life's been invested in cycling, and I have a bit of sympathy for him, seeing, you know, what's all gone on. So there seems to be some inconsistency within Green Edge at the moment, and I don't see why Matt should
It's
not
easier to rebuild if you're a rider as opposed to in administration. So these guys, they get a chance to rebuild their reputation and rebuild their career. But White is left on the sidelines at the moment. If you were the manager at Orica Green Edge, would you take the risk to the reputation of that team by giving Matt White his job back?
Well, I think the situation we've got right now is that Green Edge are waiting for Asada to come down with their report on Matt White and the doping within Australian cycling that's gone on. So that's now been delayed because of what's happening with the NRL and AFL doping saga.
And wouldn't have that brought a smile to the face of a few people within cycling?
Oh, look, it would, but it certainly doesn't help what's happening in cycling, but it lets everybody else out there know that cycling's not the only sport. Exactly.
It's not the only one.
But I think there's inconsistencies between USADA, so the American anti-doping organisation, and ASADA, the Australian one. I think the Americans are allowed to race because they were penalised by their governing body. Our governing body hasn't even put down a penalty on Matt White. I believe
Which is appalling.
Of course
they should actually make a decision. There's paperwork holding it up. It's unfair on Matt White. He needs to know what the deal is, because you're not going to give him his job back. I wouldn't give him his job back until ASADA has handed down their finding. Yeah. So it's up to them. And now we're also seeing at Orica Green Edge their internal investigation. So what happens with the elephant in the room? Does Neil Stevens get a haircut and lose the mullet?
The elephant in the room is Neil Stevens' mullet. Nobody says anything about it, and yeah, it's disturbing.
So it's going to be interesting to see what they actually do with it. So what do you think? Matt White, if you had the call and you were at Orica Green Edge, would you give Matt White his job back? Over the weekend, we saw Gerhard Cholik win Milan San Remo, but the big story, the conditions, unbelievably cold. Even Tor Hushovd from Norway said it's the coldest he's ever been. So before we talk about the race, what's the coldest you've ever been? I'm going to ask you first, Scott, because he's cheating. It's performance-enhancing cold competition stories because he's from Canada. What's the coldest you've ever been?
His whole entire childhood was in freezing conditions. For me, it was a race in Austria, and terrible clothing selection at the start of the day. We were down low in the valley, went up over a couple of mountain passes, but I was completely drenched through from the start of the race. As we climbed, it went from rain to sleet to snow, and then of course 10 to 15 kilometres of descending. Then once again, drenched through again to rain to sleet to snow, descended another 20 or 30 kilometres. Got off the bike on the descent because I thought I just can't do this anymore. I remember a Russian rider coming flying past, screaming, just crying at the top of his voice, and I thought,
you yell at your sook.
Well, I'd stopped. I'm not going to say anything on the side of the road. Continued on, ended up riding to the finish with an Australian, very close friend of mine, David Maltby, and we were guiding each other to the finish, bouncing off each of the whole way, eyes bouncing in our heads, and it was that cold that in the end, my toenails eventually went black and fell off with frostbite.
You can top it, surely.
Well,
you still got your toenails.
The thing about you, Scott, is that you would have been forced to ride in those conditions. I always had a choice, right? I was never a professional rider. So, but my story comes from a non-race, and we were out mountain biking actually, and it was probably beautiful 15 degrees when we first started. We started coming back, and it was...
This story was going to be good.
Blizzard, absolute whiteout blizzard. We were lost for 10 hours. We couldn't see a thing. We were on the opposite side of this massive lake. Finally, we got picked up by a logging truck. and were taken back home. But otherwise, we would have been frozen cavemen found 10,000 years later.
All right, you win. You win. Mine was from a training ride up Mount Buffalo. And we were riding up the Mount Buffalo. It started that sleet, kind of not quite 0 degrees for proper snow. We went into the chalet and we used the drying room for the skiers. And there was 6 of us. We all took our clothes off, stuck the clothes out to dry. So we're standing around naked, 6 blokes. And it was like trying not to look at cleavage. You had to make eye contact the whole time. And we ended up getting a lift back down the hill from a guy in a Bedford that was having a smoke and a tinny at about 10 a.m. in the morning. It was ridiculous. So Milan San Remo. We saw a race that wasn't really good in terms of new people into the sport because, you know, just seen a war of attrition. But for those of us who are super passionate about the sport, been involved for a long time, you appreciate that war of attrition. Yeah. But is Milan San Remo cycling's answer to basketball? It's only the last 5 minutes that count. It's the last 30 Ks in Milan San Remo.
Except for, you know, some of the Cobble Classics and, well, all of the classics. That's kind of bike racing, I think. You know, it is a lot of foreplay before the final 50K or the last quarter of the race, and then it really gets good. And Milan San Remo is kind of like that. And it's, yeah, but it's always interesting to see the different types of people that win. Often it's a sprinter, but no, I don't think the course should change or anything like that to try to appease everybody.
Well, they've changed the course over the years, haven't they? They brought in the Poggio in 1960, then they brought in the Cipressa after that, and then the latest one was the La Manière was the next climb they brought in. The absolute fastest sprinters in the world are still now making it to the finish, but it's the guys like Mark Renshaw, Graham Brown from Aussie perspective that don't get to the finish, that don't compete in the sprint. Oscar Freire, Eric Zabel,
but
Matt
Mark
Goss.
Cavendish wins, and he's the world's fastest sprinter. Gossi can win, he's one of the fastest sprinters, but don't classify them as just sprinters.
They're not.
They're better than that.
Yeah, of course.
They're not just sprinters.
Yeah.
I say don't change the course, keep its personality, but stop it from snowing. More global warming, and then we'd have a race that would be outstanding. Although it was a brilliant race, what a great win it was. Fantastic story. Coming out of this weekend's Milan San Remo was some pretty entertaining tweets in the middle of a bike race. And Mark Cavendish, as always, set the benchmark with effing freezing. Couldn't have caught though, was a pretty good challenger. Scotty, he was ready to be shot.
He was. He said, it's snowing so much this could be a biathlon. If so, can I be shot first?
When I first read that, I don't know about you, Wade, but I read it as, can I shoot first? Initially, but he wants to be shot. He wants to be put out of his misery.
Put out of his misery, that's right.
Some of the photos, and when you see Greg Henderson, the photo of Greg Henderson, with just ice over the stack hat, it's phenomenal.
And he got his bike stolen just before the race as well. So, I mean, it wasn't a good day for Greg Henderson, was it?
No, it was a tough day. So we enjoyed the fact that this was a John Craven-style race with a split stage for Milan San Remo and getting tweets from the riders. More of that, it could be all right.
Well, it was also a bit like a handicap too, wasn't it? The fact that there was a gap of 7 minutes and 10 seconds to the breakaway group of 6, so they had to restart them. And so when we did the commentary, it was almost, okay, limit markers now off and running. We were waiting for Scratch to get going, and they're all waiting to go a little bit before the gun. And yeah, so limit up the road, Scratch chased them down. They caught them in the end, actually. Yeah, it was the fastest time as well.
It was the 1995 Melbourne to Warrnambool. The weather conditions bring about the tech bit for this week, and raincoats. What's the best raincoat you've ever used? For me, it's the Assos raincoat, which I can't even remember what it costs. I bought it 10 years ago and I've still got it. What's your wet weather choice?
The only expensive, real good quality raincoat I've ever had is a Rafa one, and it is amazing.
Is that because you previously were the distributor of Rafa in Australia?
Yeah, I didn't have to pay a lot for them. That's exactly why it was affordable. But I used to always wear just those plastic bags, like just the see-through and everything. And
$30.
those were just, and they were just basically disposable, and they were just sweat bags.
Sweat box. Yeah. What about you?
Well, I'd have to agree. The Rafa stuff that they're producing now is fantastic. But for me, it's all about layering. And I've got that many different types of, depending on the temperature and the weather, I've got 3 or 4 different types of gloves and shoe covers and leg warmers and things and vests, and you've just got to have that many items of clothing to get it right. And for me, it's about layering. But I think the full rain jacket, really good gloves and really good shoe covers are the most important things.
What came out of this weekend's Milan San Remo was a lot of people were wearing the same rain jacket. And a lot of them had the Castelli rain jacket on. But what about the commentary challenge with everybody wearing a black raincoat, and then there's a helicopter shot, and I found myself in commentary saying, oh, there's Mark Cavendish in the black, but everybody else is in the black as well. So trying to identify the riders and point them out was actually pretty hard.
But you came into your own, Matt. You must give yourself some credit there.
I love those conditions to commentate when there's nobody, you can't see anybody's numbers, and you can prove your ability to ID the riders. More rain, the better, I say. Love it. So, what's your choice of raincoat? I think Castelli will be selling through the roof for the next week or so, because teams not even sponsored by that clothing manufacturer were wearing them. This Friday, it's National Ride to School Day, an initiative by the Bicycle Network Group. Wade, in those freezing conditions, I assume you missed the blizzards in Canada. Did you ride to school?
Yeah, we did all the time, and I just grew up in a tiny little town where it was safe, and you know, you didn't think about traffic or anything like that like you would here in a big city.
Yeah, ride to school?
Absolutely. Going to high school on the Gold Coast. I used to motor pace to school, actually, up the Gold Coast Highway, getting behind the buses and trucks, until I ran into the back of one of the tip trucks, and I slowed down after that.
Did you let your kids ride to school?
Absolutely, yeah. I've got a 10-year-old daughter that rides to school. It's only a few blocks, and she parks her bike in the bike rack at school alongside the other 2 bikes that are in there, and perhaps 10 scooters. That's about it.
My kids aren't old enough to ride to school yet, and I used to ride to school, but I'm nervous about letting them ride to school. And I put the question out on Twitter yesterday, and a few of the responses coming back were that that's the problem. People are scared of the risk, so they put their kids in the car, and that actually just perpetuates the risk. Yeah. How do we fix it?
Yeah, it's a long-term cultural change, isn't it? It's not just a quick fix, and you know, there's no way I would let my kids go to school where I live compared to where the schools are. You know, if I had kids at this moment, no way.
And you've seen the mainstream media; they talk about how dangerous cyclists are. They're a menace on the road, etc., etc. But do you think that people aren't letting their kids ride to school because of the other cyclists? Of course not. It's because the other motorists.
Yeah, of course. And they're driving all their kids to school, which is putting more forward drives, normally, typically, on the roads as well, which is also, as you say, perpetuating the situation. But there's no bike ed anymore at schools, or very little. Not many schools are doing that anymore. And as I say, you know, my daughter rides to school. She's only 10, and there are maybe 2 other kids that do that.
So we need to get the mainstream media on board. And Raphael Epstein, who's the host of the Drive program on ABC here in Melbourne, he rides to work every day. So Raph, on Friday, instead of it being the Drive program, the challenge is, let's call it the Ride program. The Spring Classics roll on this weekend as the peloton heads up north to the Belgium Classics, with the Pavé returning to racing. It's E3 Harold Baker and Ghent-Wevelgem. But Wade Wallace, they fail into insignificance next to Paris-Roubaix and the Tour of Flanders that are still coming. Do you care about the result?
For these races, I mean, it's exciting. It's a great precursor up to the Spring Classics because all the big hitters are there. You can see who's going well, and it's that anticipation that builds that gets me excited.
You, Scotty?
I do care about them. I think that you know, if you're not on form this weekend, you won't be on form for Flanders or for Roubaix. Fabian Cancellara is perhaps the exception, where he needs to hold back and showing how strong he is right now, because he just tends to do that, and everybody then sees him as the favourite.
But a guy like Tor Hushovd, he would need a win, because he hasn't had much success the last 18 months, and a win would be really good for his morale.
And he's on good form as well. Like, let's look at Torino Adriatico. He finished in the group with Contador on the really difficult stage with classic type climbs, really steep climbs. Peter Sagan obviously won that particular day, but Hushovd was in good form on that day. Milan San Remo for me was also one of the races where the good guys out in front obviously had very good form and they survived the conditions, but it's hard to get an idea of who wasn't going well because of the conditions.
Yeah.
So Hushovd has good form, but he wasn't good at Milan San Remo. I don't think that really counts coming into this weekend.
Ghent-Wevelgem was made famous in the English-speaking world because of George Hincapie in the road to Paris. But like football cards, you're pretty selective in the ones that you want. Do you think he'd trade in 5 Ghent-Wevelgems for 1 Paris-Roubaix?
Yeah, he probably would, but these semi-classics are stepping stones to the big ones. And you know, someone like Koen de Kort, who got 3rd in Dwars last year, that was a big result for him. So I mean, these really do mean something to a lot of the riders, because they are something for bigger things to come.
And Henk Vogels was close. He was second once, but when I was a kid with football cards, I had plenty of Kevin Bartlett's. I had heaps of Kevin Bartlett's because he played 403 games. But I always wanted a Peter Bosustow. So I would have traded in 5 KBs for 1 Peter Bosustow. Where do they rate for you in that regard?
Oh, look, of course, it's pretty similar to in that situation where you'd like to win them because they're good races, they're important races, and they are very difficult. You don't have, I guess, too many surprises. The riders like Henk Vogels, I actually thought that he would have won Tour of Flanders or Paris-Roubaix when he first turned professional. Sometime in his career, he never did that. He was always going to be a good rider. Hincapie, you know, obviously a good rider as well. And I had a conversation with Shane Kelly, similar situation about this a few years ago, and he said to me that he would trade in all of his World Championship gold medals, four of them, for one Olympic gold medal. So a similar situation.
Okay, so how many world titles would it take for you to trade in your Olympic gold medal? Would you trade your Olympic gold medal in for 10 world titles?
No.
15?
No.
Fair enough. That's it for this episode of The Bike Lane. Thanks to the guys from the Bike Gallery for hosting us. The big discussion point has been the cold weather. So whose story is better? He's lost toenail, or the fact that the Canadian was lost almost in the wilderness? Bear Grylls versus Scott McGrory. Join us next week, and we look forward to reading your comments.